Hi friends, welcome back to another episode of Generation Tech. My name is Alan. Today we continue our Clone Wars history series with the second year of the war. It's 21 BBY. Now before we begin today's episode, don't forget to subscribe down below. Generation Tech's subscribe button is attached to a Death Star, and every time someone subscribes, another planet of Xenos is wiped out. In our last episode, we took a look at Coruscant's underworld. You know what they say, you can almost find anything you're looking for if you go deep enough into Coruscant. Coming out to the surface, however, is not guaranteed. In this episode, we'll be looking at the world of Mandalore and the complicated battle for the future and soul of the Mandalorian people. We're relatively different from the legendary Mandalorians older fans are used to. The Mandalorians of old were a great tribe of space warriors whose culture revolved around honor and combat. Thousands of years of constant warfare naturally took a toll on the Mandalorians and on their world. During the Clone Wars period, Duchess Satine Kryze sits on the throne. Just decades earlier, Satine Kryze's faction, called the New Mandalorians, had fought a devastating civil war against a faction of old-school Mandalorians who wanted to continue on the warrior traditions of their people. Ultimately, Satine's faction won. Having studied her people's past, she believed that pacifism was the only way her people could survive. With the start of the Clone Wars, the Mandalorians took a stance of neutrality, refusing to enter either side of the war. Their actions inspired many other planets, and together these worlds formed the Council of Neutral Systems, with Duchess Satine as their leader. For the most part, the Mandalorians had kept the violence of the Clone Wars away from their planet. But the Republic Senate was wary that the Mandalorians were going to use their influence over the Council of Neutral Systems to break off from the Republic, as the Separatists had done before. And so the Jedi Order, at the behest of the Senate, sends Obi-Wan Kenobi to Mandalore to find out exactly what is going on. Obi-Wan Kenobi had originally visited Mandalore with Qui-Gon Jinn in a mission to keep Satine Kryze safe during the Civil War. What most people didn't know was that Obi-Wan and Satine had grown quite close during that mission. Qui-Gon Jinn wasn't exactly the most orthodox Jedi Master and probably looked the other way as their young romance began to bud. Upon meeting the Prime Minister and Duchess, they both parrot the same words. Mandalore is loyal and things are going great on their world. The Mandalorians are a peaceful kind of people. And all the big bad warriors their culture was known for had been sent to the moon, where they had died off. Of course, Obi-Wan Kenobi has had his own experience with Mandalorians and is quite skeptical. And he turns out to be right. While touring the city together in private, Satine, away from her advisors, admits that the renegade Mandalorians Obi-Wan had encountered were most likely the Death Watch, a group of super violent but also arguably a lot cooler Mandalorians that lived by the old ways. Most Mandalorians had assumed that after the Civil War they had just disappeared. While Satine is trying to assure Obi-Wan Kenobi that they're only a small nuisance, an explosion interrupts them, one of the latest attempts by the Death Watch to destabilize the Duchess's rule. After surviving the attack, Satine and Obi-Wan ventured to Mandalore's moon, Concordia, in order to look for signs of Death Watch. The two are greeted upon landing by Governor Pre Vizsla. While Satine is entertained by the governor, Obi-Wan goes on a fact-finding mission to check out one of the nearby mining facilities. The Mandalorian commandos he had encountered before were all wearing the legendary Beskar armor, something that can only be created here on Mandalore or on its moon, Concordia. The mines and factories were supposed to be closed, but the one Obi-Wan enters seems to be functional and is producing Mandalorian armor. And before he can report his findings, he's ambushed and knocked out. Luckily, he still has his comlink on, and he contacts Satine for help once he wakes up again. And she arrives just in time to save him from being smelted. But now the jig is up, the Death Watch is alerted to their presence, and Satine and Obi-Wan finally come face to face with their leader, Governor Pre Vizsla. You see, the governor was from a famous clan, a clan that still followed the old ways. Vizsla had been contacted by Count Dooku, who had promised to support a Death Watch takeover of the planet. Vizsla goes toe-to-toe with Obi-Wan Kenobi using the legendary Darksaber, a lightsaber that once belonged to a Mandalorian Jedi and now was a sign of Mandalorian leadership. Obi-Wan survives the encounter and manages to escape with the Duchess, but now things grow more complicated. Pre Vizsla and his Death Watch managed to escape before the authorities arrive, and there's a strong indication that the Separatists were backing Pre Vizsla, which means the Republic might now have to get involved in the affairs of neutral Mandalore. Duchess Satine must venture back to Coruscant to plead their case in front of the Republic Senate. Obi-Wan Kenobi and Anakin Skywalker, along with an detachment of clones, will provide security along the way. They know that most likely someone else will make an attempt on the Duchess, and we're on high alert. While Duchess Satine has her little sleepover party with other world leaders who also want to remain neutral, terrifying killer droids activate in the hold of her ship and start killing everyone. Technically called probe killers, these spider-like droids were especially programmed for assassination missions. Satine Kryze's pursuit of pacifism was definitely admirable, and perhaps if she were just a mere activist and not the ruler of Mandalore, her views would be harmless. But clearly, pacifism doesn't really work all that well when your enemies are trying to kill you. And once again, it's up to the Jedi and clones to keep those unwilling to fight themselves safe. Anakin and the clones try their best to keep the spider droids below deck, but one manages to make it up to the dining room where Satine is. Although Obi-Wan Kenobi is able to quickly dispatch the large droid, what he didn't realize was that these probe killers were actually carriers for hundreds of smaller killer droids. It's basically everyone's greatest fear when it comes to killing spiders. You don't want to kill a pregnant spider because it might just release hundreds of little tiny spider eggs. Luckily, Satine Kryze is carrying a deactivator, a specially made ion weapon that takes out droids fairly easily. With the threat defeated, the Jedi must now find who smuggled these killer assassin droids on board. Most likely there are more Mandalorians who are loyal to Death Watch. Obi-Wan suspects it's one of the senators on board. The box containing the assassin droids had official Republic stamps on them. Obi-Wan comes up with a quick plan. They've recovered one live mini assassin droid and hold it next to each of the senators on board. The mini droids are programmed to kill everyone besides the individual who smuggled it on board in the first place. That's how they find out that the traitor is none other than Senator Tal Merrick of Kalevala, a planet in the Mandalorian system. In the scuffle that breaks out, Merrick manages to take Satine as hostage and heads to the bridge where he murders the entire crew and calls for reinforcements. While Anakin and the clones fight off the Separatist borders, Obi-Wan Kenobi confronts the traitor, and in a moment of complete honesty and vulnerability, Obi-Wan admits to Satine Kryze his love for her. Had she asked, he would have left the Jedi to be by her side. But then Anakin comes out of nowhere and pokes Senator Merrick with his lightsaber. Classic Anakin. The Duchess makes it all the way to Coruscant, but her troubles are only just beginning. The Death Watch continues to grow in size, but they're not large enough yet to take over the planet, especially if they have to do it by force. Instead, they have to win the hearts and minds of the people, something that would be relatively easy to do if the Republic invaded and they opposed them. And that's exactly what Chancellor Palpatine wants to do. The Death Watch was clearly a threat, most likely just a pawn in his own Sith games. But for now, they were an ally of the Separatists and a threat to the Republic. Satine Kryze realizes she must keep the clone troopers away from Mandalore in order to stop any further escalation in the conflict there. But then Palpatine hits hard with a message from her own deputy minister who states a civil war has already started and that Satine Kryze was trying to hide that from the rest of the galaxy. The minister had been a close friend and his accusations became a shock to Satine. And to make matters worse, the deputy minister was no longer available for explaining what he had accused Satine Kryze for because he had recently died in a bombing on Kalevala. During the break in the Senate session before the Republic votes on sending force to Mandalore, the Duchess's speeder is sabotaged, her loyal bodyguards and drivers sacrifice themselves and bring her to safety before the speeder smashes into the side of a building. This was the work of another Death Watch assassin. But unfortunately, there's no sign of foul play, and Chancellor Palpatine himself rules out any criminal activity. To make matters worse, while meeting with Palpatine about the accident, the Senate had pushed forward the vote and had voted in favor of intervention on Mandalore. Clone troopers would leave for Mandalore the next morning. Satine, desperate to find out what had happened, goes into the Undercity by herself to talk to a Mandalorian contact she has in the Ministry of Intelligence. The Mandalorian had gotten his hands on the original holo from Deputy Minister, and it looks like the version Palpatine had played for the Senate had been altered. Shortly after exchanging the disc, the intelligence agent is killed by a Death Watch sniper. A nearby police probe registers Satine as the killer. She has proof that she needs to turn over to the Republic, but she's now a wanted criminal. Oh, and that Death Watch assassin is also after her as well. Satine can only turn to one man, someone who will never betray her. Her boo, Obi-Wan Kenobi. Satine handles Obi-Wan the disc for safekeeping. But before they split up, the assassin tries to kill Satine with a grenade. Very subtle and practical in a crowded city. Unfortunately for the assassin, he didn't count on a Jedi being present and barely manages to escape. Satine eventually turns herself in at the Senate complex, allowing Obi-Wan to freely enter without notice, so that he can get the data disk to Senator Padme Amidala, who shows the real message from the Deputy Minister Calavella, and it's quite different. Not only did his Deputy Minister show faith in the Duchess's ability to steer the Mandalorian clear of a civil war, he directly warns against the Republican intervention. With this new development, the Senate once again casts its vote against the invasion. Crisis is once again averted. Death Watch does not have enough resources to hold Mandalore without support of its people. So there you have it, guys. As you can see, Mandalorian politics and history is a relatively confusing one. This is a story arc that we will probably return to once again later on in the war. Anyway, guys, I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Don't forget to subscribe, hit that notification button so you don't miss out on the rest of our awesome content. As usual, thanks for joining us today. If you're watching this, you are Generation Tech.